everyone, Tiffany here with another cosplay tutorial, and we are going to be going over this time how I made my shoulder pads for my World of Warcraft cosplay. And here are some of the in-game reference images that I used. For these pieces, I first did some very basic 2D lines in Adobe Illustrator, which I then imported into a 3D modeling program called Rhino 6 and made each of the pieces in there. Each of the shoulder pads had a base structure, as well as one side had a book that I had made and the other side had a hammer, as well as having all of the 6 floating shards around the floating piece. I also have plans that all of these pieces are going to float with the help of clear acrylic rods. So I used placement holders with pink rods shown here in the pictures, so that way it would remove the holes in my 3D models, so later on I can actually insert those pieces in there. I also decided to make the little buttons on the front and back pieces in Rhino as well. And when I was happy with all of my 3D models, I ended up printing them in ABS filament on my Prusa i3 Mark 2.5 3D printer. After removing the support structure from printing the pieces, it ended up having a little bit of fluffy fiber edges. So I ended up melting a lot of those pieces together using a soldering iron. I will note also that you do need to wear a respirator while doing this process. ABS fumes are very toxic, so open windows as well. For further cleanup, I went with my Dremel and a buffing wheel, and this helped to melt some of the 3D printing materials together, and also to remove more of the stair step. I then went and added battle damage to each of the pieces, again using my Dremel and a sanding disc. To give the floating illusion that all of these pieces will need, I ended up using clear acrylic rods, which I cut with my handsaw, and then I ended up sanding just the part that was going to be glued with sanding paper, and then attached the acrylic rods with epoxy. And once all the glue was dry, I ended up masking off each of the clear acrylic rods with masking tape. This will prevent any paint from getting onto the clear acrylic rods. To get a smooth surface on each of the 3D printed pieces, as well as to remove the stair step process from printing, I ended up spraying 2 heavy coats of sandable spray paint onto each of the pieces, and then waited for each piece to dry before sanding and repeating the process one more time. To get my templates for my EVA foam parts of the shoulder pads, I ended up wrapping the base 3D printed structure in saran wrap and masking tape, drawing on my lines, as well as using some just paper to kind of form my shapes that I wanted to cut. I then separated those pieces and traced them onto a mixture of 6mm EVA foam and 2mm EVA foam, and then cut each piece out using an X-Acto blade. For rounding all of the edges as well as making some pieces more sharp, I used a sanding drum, which I then heat treated and glued to the main 3D printed structure using contact cement glue. For the more pointed part of the shoulder pads, I ended up splitting it into 2 sections, which I then sanded down the middle at a 45-degree angle, so that way I would have a nice sharp point, as well as I rounded all of the edges with a sanding drum. Next, I heat treated each piece using a heat gun again, and then used contact cement glue to attach each piece together. And here's what the 2 pieces look like when they are attached together. I then repeated the same process of using contact cement glue to attach this piece to the main structure part. Now for the other smaller layers of the shoulder pads. I once again cut each piece with the 6mm EVA foam, as well as rounded all the edges and then attach them with contact cement glue. And here's how I formed the back 3 layers of the shoulder pad, as well as the extra piece on the front. For the detailed rope part of the hammer, I ended up cutting a strip of 2mm EVA foam, which I then heat treated and glued to the hammer's handle with contact cement glue. Now the shoulder pads have this weird random blue strap ribbon thing on the back of them, and to get this form I ended up cutting out 4 pieces of 8mm EVA foam that I glued together to form this weird U shape. I will note that they are not the same shape for each of the layers. Reason being is I want it to look more organic and not just a flat up and down. I then followed by sanding the top half and the bottom half using a sanding drum, and then cut out 2 sheets of 2mm EVA foam, which I then heat treated the whole piece, followed by applied contact cement glue to the whole sheet of 2mm EVA foam, as well as contact cement glue to our U-shaped pieces. And once the contact cement glue was dry, I then wrapped the 2mm EVA foam over our U-shaped piece. This is going to give the illusion that it is more of a piece of fabric laying over, and will kind of give a more natural, organic look. I then proceeded by trimming off all of the extra 2mm EVA foam, as well as rounding all of the edges with a sanding drum so it all looked like one piece. Next, I cut out 2 rectangular pieces out of 2mm EVA foam, which I then attached to the ends of the U-shaped pieces, and then attached with contact cement glue our 3D printed button pieces to those. And once that U-shaped piece was all done, I then attached it to the bottom part of our main shoulder pads. To get rid of any of the cracks and seams, I used foam clay, which I applied with my hands and then added water and smoothed down so it looked even with the piece. Of course, they also needed more battle damage, so I again used my Dremel as well as a sanding disc and went to town giving it battle damage. For doing our base prime coats, I applied 4 heavy coats of Plasti-Dip to every piece. This also includes all of our 3D printed pieces, so that way all of the elements when they come together will have a even consistency and look the same. For painting, I first started off with our blue sections with a turquoise color, followed by a blue, and then going into more shadows with a dark black blue color. And once the blue colors were dry, I then masked them off with masking tape as well as paper. I then proceeded to do all of our yellow colors with a base coat of yellow, followed by a more creamy orange color, then a little bit more yellow in some highlighted areas, and then a little bit more shadows with a mocha color. And once again, I masked off all of the yellow painted areas. For the glowy look of the shoulder pads, I started off with a base coat of white, followed by yellow, and then a little bit of a light orange around the edges and a darker red orange around the very, very base of it, so that way it would look kind of flame-like. And once again, masked off those sections. For our gray sections, I first started off by doing a base coat of black airbrush paint onto all of these pieces. Reason being is we had a little bit of extra color sprays on some of these sections. Then I did a light gray color, followed by some black foreshadowing with the Tester airbrush paint. I also did this for all of our floating pieces as well. And once all the paint was dry, I removed all of the masking tape and paper from all of the pieces. And then I went in by hand with more of my black Tester's airbrush paint and a paintbrush, and went in all of the battle damage areas as well as around some of the lettering for the books, just to give it that much more pop. And when all that paint was dry, I then sealed each of the pieces using satin clear enamel spray paint. Next, I glued each of the floating elements to the book using epoxy, and then glued the book onto the shoulder pad. For the hammer side of the shoulder pads, I glued all the floating elements to the shoulder pad first, and then glued the hammer to the shoulder pad last. The only step left was to attach my Velcro to the inside of the shoulder pads, as well as I sewed Velcro to my bodysuit. This will be how I attach the shoulder pads to myself. And that's how I made my shoulder pads for my Radiant Lightbringer armor set, Mythic color, for my World of Warcraft cosplay. Thanks guys for watching our latest tutorial, and I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, remember to subscribe to the channel as well as check me out on all of my social medias. Much love guys! Mwah!